This is CNN Breaking News.
We're coming to you live from Geneva, Switzerland, where we're covering the Biden-Putin summit taking place just 2 days from now. Let's go straight to Brussels first, though, where we just heard from President Biden. Our senior White House correspondent, Phil Mattingly, is on the scene for us tonight. Phil, the president is clearly looking ahead to his summit with Putin that will take place here in Geneva.
Wolf, it has been the ever-present element throughout the course of President Biden's foreign trip. Yes, he was seeking to bolster the U.S. approach and the U.S. Involvement in G7, certainly in the NATO summit here in Brussels. But through each meeting that he had with any of the allied world leaders, he made clear that meeting was integral to what was coming next. And those meetings themselves, the G7 meeting and the NATO meeting, they all serve as a through line towards that meeting in Geneva. The president wanting to show a united front, taking not just himself into that meeting, but all of the allied Western democracies. Now, Wolf, he has played strategically coy about what exactly he's going to say when he sits down with the Russian president and what exactly he expects from that meeting. But tonight, he made clear these are his outlines. Take a listen.
I'm going to make clear to President Putin that there are areas where we can cooperate if he chooses. And if he chooses not to cooperate and acts in a way that he has in the past relative to cybersecurity and some other activities, then we will respond. I'm hoping that that President Putin concludes that there is some interest in terms of his own interests in changing the perception of the world has of him in terms of whether or not he will engage in behavior that's more consistent with what is considered to be appropriate behavior for head of state. He's bright, he's tough, and I have found that he is as they say when you used to play ball, a worthy adversary.
And, Wolf, you could hear President Biden signaling he understands, he has a very clear-eyed view of the meeting that he's heading into, an unpredictable world leader, one that is known to hijack conversations, take them in completely different directions, undercut the intent of any conversation, and that's been part of the president's preparation, officials say. But you heard him make clear what the priorities are. Yes, lay out guardrails or red lines where the U.S. will respond if the Russian government continues malign activities, but also seeking areas of cooperation, areas of mutual interest, whether those can be established, whether the president can hit all of the marks or goals that he's laying out. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see for a couple of days.
Yes, we will. Phil, our Jeff Zeleny at that news conference asked President Biden whether or not he still thought Putin was a killer. How did the president respond to that?
You know, it was a very interesting response to a very good question by our colleague. Obviously, this came up in an interview earlier in the year, and he confirmed that he believed Vladimir Putin was a killer. And when he was asked if he still does, this was how he responded.
In a weekend interview, Vladimir Putin laughed at the suggestion that you had called him a killer. Is that still your belief, sir, that he is a killer?
Well, look, I mean, he has made clear that the answer is, I believe he has in the past essentially acknowledged that he was, there are certain things that he would do or did do. But look, when I was asked that question on air, I answered it honestly. But it's not much of I don't think it matters a whole lot in terms of this next meeting we're about to have.
And, Wolf, what was so interesting about that answer was the short answer is yes. President Biden very clearly still believes President Putin is a killer, but you could see the strategic calculation as he was deciding where he was going to go with that answer and then how he ended it, making clear that this is the reality, and yet this is still a crucial relationship with a nuclear power, one that the U.S. needs to figure out a path forward given its current kind of low-level state of affairs. And that is precisely why the president wants to meet with President Putin. He acknowledges who he is, and what he represents, but he still believes a face-to-face meeting is a necessity with a country that can work with the U.S. on several elements, but obviously has been creating significant problems, not just for the U.S., but also for allies throughout Europe over the course of the last several decades. Wolf.
Yeah, will be a very critical and For us, I know you're going to be heading over here soon. We'll see you when you get here. Thank you very, very much. There's more breaking news we're following right now. A U.S. judge calling for a prisoner exchange between the United States of the Biden summit. Our senior international correspondent, Matthew Chance, is. You've got some new reporting. Tell us what you're learning.
Yeah, this is the judge back in 2012 who originally sentenced Victor Bout, who's one of the world's most notorious arms traffickers, to a 25-year sentence in a court in New York. He's one of the people that the Russians want exchanged, potentially in a possible prisoner swap that is going to be discussed. There's a whole range of issues, of course, a list as long as your arm, Wolf, of fraught issues between the United States and Russia that the two presidents are going to be speaking about, whether it's the military threat on Ukraine, whether it's the election hacking, whether it's the crackdown on dissidents at home. But there are other more surface issues as well, like the exchange of ambassadors and like the exchange of prisoners. Now, that's something that I know for a fact, because I've spoken to them about it, the Kremlin say is a sensitive issue, but it is one that's going to be on the agenda. And so the fact that this judge has now intervened and she's said, look, you know, Victor Bout has already served a long time in prison, that would make sense. And I'm paraphrasing her, that would make sense that he is swapped for someone like Paul Whelan, who's been sentenced the last couple of years ago to 16 years in prison for espionage. Yeah. There's another American, a former US Marine as well, Trevor Reed. His parents were on CNN early this morning making a heartfelt appeal to the Russian and American presidents to try and come to some arrangement to try and get him back home. I think we've got sound from his mother now.
We've been told that President Biden is definitely going to bring up Trevor's case and Paul Whelan's case with President Putin. And our hope, obviously, is that they can come to some agreement that will let our son come home. I guess Putin is open to a prisoner exchange. And I know some people say we shouldn't do a prisoner exchange because Paul and Trevor are innocent of the charges against them, and the people that we would be trading are guilty criminals. But I really don't care how my son gets home. I just want him to get home.
Well, Trevor Reed's mum there hitting the nail on the head, Wolf, because the problem, according to US diplomats, is that the level of criminality of the Russians that the Kremlin wants returned, you know, it doesn't match with what Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed are accused of. They're in a different category, and so they think it wouldn't be a fair swap. That's a hurdle that has to be got over.
It certainly does. All right, Matthew, stand by. I want to get back to you. But right now, I also want to bring in Ian Bremmer, president of the Eurasia Group and G0 Media. He's joining us from New York right now. Ian, President Biden says the U.S. will respond to Russian aggression, but he also called Putin, and we heard him, he called Putin a worthy adversary. What does that tell you just ahead of their face-to-face meeting here in Geneva?
It tells me he wants this to be as constructive a meeting as it can be. I mean, everyone is asking Biden and the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, about whether you're going to hit the Russians hard for all the things that the Russians are doing that we don't like, the cyber hacks, the support for the Belarusian dictator, the human rights abuses, the treatment of Navalny. And every time we see the Biden administration saying, I want to see if there are areas that we can work together. I want to see if there are areas that cooperate. I want to meet with them face to face. Look, Biden sees that overwhelmingly the single biggest strategic adversary of the United States, and there's bipartisan support for this, is not Russia, it's China. And in that regard, he really doesn't want to fight on two fronts at the same time. Trump had no problem fighting on 5 fronts at the same time, even sometimes with allies. Biden's really focusing on China, and he would like this meeting to go as well as possible. And I think we're going to be surprised by some of the opportunities that Biden hopes he's going to see, certainly on arms control. One of the first things Biden did when he was president is he extended the START agreement on arms control with the Russians for 5 years. He was involved in the IMF, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, back when he was at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He'd like to see more of that with the Russians, wants to see where else we can engage.
Very significant. You know, it's interesting, Matthew, because you've covered Putin for a long time. President Biden says he's ready to deliver what he called a frank message. But were you surprised to hear him sort of, dodge the question whether he still thinks that Putin is a killer?
Well, I have to agree with what Ian was saying there. I mean, what US officials have been saying, what Biden's been saying time and again, is he wants to try and establish a stable relationship with Russia and with President Putin. The problem is with that, of course, is that would mean leaving aside all of those issues that we've just been discussing, the military threat against Ukraine, the crackdown on dissidents at home, the election hacking. Yes, Biden would like to stabilize the relationship, but he can't ignore the fact that Russia continues to be a malign player in many instances from a US point of view around the world. And that's going to be a challenge. You might get through this meeting, but how's he going to get through the presidency?
Yeah, that's obviously a key question. Phil Mattingly, you're still with us over there in Brussels. President Biden has been doing extensive preparation for this summit, which is totally understandable. He's also been asking other world leaders for their input. So how does he juggle all of these concerns over Russia's behavior right now? Because U.S.-Russian relations are pretty awful right now.
Look, I think when you talk to U.S. officials, they make clear the president wants to hear what allies think, and particularly the allies in the Baltic region or allies in Eastern European countries, knowing that they are often the ones under the most threat from Russia, at least in the way it's engaged over the course of the last several years. And I think what you see, or what you've seen over the course of the last several days, is he's met with leaders, whether at the G7 or here in NATO, he spoke with a number of leaders throughout the course of the day, is a recognition that it's important that he listen and hear their voices because of what they're going for. What they're going for is to try and show that the alliances are unified heading into that meeting. Again, that it's not just President Biden alone. It's all Western democracies allied together, something that was very much in question when his predecessor was in office. And so that was it was incumbent upon the president to listen. And yes, there will be a balance in terms of what he actually decides to bring up with President Putin. But I do think the president has made very clear his agenda, where his outlines are of things. And he wanted the advice of his fellow world leaders, particularly those in the Eastern European and Baltic regions, and that's something that he believes, and I think his advisors believe, will inform the entire approach to President Putin when they sit down.
Ian, based on everything we've seen publicly and what we've heard privately, the European leaders, they trust President Biden. The relief at the G7 and NATO summits clearly palpable after 4 years of Trump. But do they trust the United States right now? Do they trust Congress in the aftermath, let's say, of January 6th and the insurrection on the U.S. Capitol?
Less so. And I mean, one of the reasons you saw no movement on climate finance, despite the fact that Biden brought the United States back into the Paris Climate Accord and has appointed John Kerry to a cabinet position on climate, is precisely because they don't believe that the U.S. legislature is going to get a lot done. And until they see it, they may trust the United States, they may like the United States, but they want to verify with the United States. There are a lot of issues like that right now. But let's also keep in mind that the Europeans want more America, in part not because the U.S. is so trusted, in part because the U.S. is by far the most powerful country in the world. That was true under Obama, it's true under Trump, and it's true under Biden. And that was one of the reasons why you saw leadership come out of the G7, 1 billion vaccines being provided by the United States and allies to poor countries. It was not enough, and it was later than it should have been, but it's by far the biggest thing we've seen so far. The allies were delighted for it. We'll see more of that, Wolf.
I hope we will. All right, guys, thank you very, very much. We're going to continue to stay on top of the breaking news, but also coming up, new revelations about secret Justice Department subpoenas targeting former President Trump's perceived enemies. And now we're learning his former White House counsel was among those targeted. Plus, former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowing to topple the new government in Jerusalem that ousted him and return to power. We're here in Geneva, Switzerland, a really beautiful city, an amazing place indeed. We're getting ready for the Biden-Putin summit that will take place here on Wednesday. Much more on that coming up as we get ready to cover a truly historic event. But there's other important news we're following as well, including important news back in Washington. There are new details emerging tonight of secret U.S. Justice Department subpoenas targeting former President Trump's political foes. And now we're learning a former White House counsel as well. CNN Justice correspondent Jessica Schneider is joining us right now. She has the latest. Jessica, some truly surprising new revelations.
Absolutely, Wolf. We're learning tonight that Trump's White House counsel Don McGahn's records were also subpoenaed. So with some lingering questions on why tonight, Attorney General Merrick Garland, he's emphasizing his commitment to keeping politics out of the Justice Department and thoroughly investigating what happened with these wide-ranging subpoenas. It's coming at the same time Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee are demanding that Attorney General Garland produce information about the subpoenas and fully brief them. Tonight, Attorney General Merrick Garland pledging a thorough and independent investigation into the subpoenas and gag orders that included obtaining records from some of former President Trump's biggest congressional foes.
Everything we thought a president never would do, Donald Trump did, and now it's a question of what are we willing to do to preserve the republic.
Congressman Swalwell and House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff learned in May that the Justice Department subpoenaed their records beginning in February 2018. Trump frequently targeted both men when he railed against the Russia investigation.
I think it was leaks from the Intelligence Committee, House version, and I think that they leaked it. I think probably Schiff leaked it.
But this weekend, yet another revelation. The DOJ requested records for accounts of former White House counsel Don McGahn and his wife during this same time period in early 2018. The increasing number of secretive seizures raising more questions about why justice officials took these steps. Why were the records collected? Who was being targeted in any leak investigation and why? Was the investigation politically motivated or about a legitimate national security threat? We know that Trump had become disillusioned with his top legal counsel when McGahn refused to fire special counsel Robert Mueller, leading to questions of possible presidential obstruction. But a source tells CNN Mueller's team did not issue this subpoena for McGahn's records. Former Attorneys General Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr, along with former Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein, all say they had no knowledge of the subpoenas. Now Democrats are demanding Sessions and Barr testify.
How could it be that there could be an investigation of other members in the other branch of government and the press and the rest too? And the attorneys general did not know. So who are these people, and are they still in the Justice Department?
The Justice Department's Inspector General announced a probe on Friday, and now Attorney General Garland says Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco will also work on surfacing potentially problematic matters deserving high-level review and aim to evaluate and strengthen the department's existing policies and procedures for obtaining records of the legislative branch. The Attorney General is meeting today with executives from CNN, The Washington Post, and The New York Times, all of whom want answers about why the Justice Department under Trump demanded logs from journalists' communications.
This is not just some kind of Washington insider thing. This is about people's phone records being subpoenaed without them even knowing about it.
And we've also learned the Trump appointee who led the National Security Division at DOJ, John Demers, he will leave at the end of the month, something that was previously planned according to a source. But it is notable because the National Security Division plays a large role in these leak investigations, and they would be directly involved in obtaining these records from journalists and Democratic lawmakers. Wolf?
All right, Jessica Schneider reporting for us. Thank you very much. Let's get some more on all of this. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Clearly, there's still so much we don't know about this situation. Why hasn't the Biden Justice Department answered crucial questions about these investigations?
Well, Wolf, and it's good to be with you. I would say that I think they are probably being very, very careful here because I suspect that they, like the rest of us, don't know how far this extends. I mean, it's shocking enough in and of itself that journalists had their records pulled and weren't told about it. Members of Congress of the opposition party had their records pulled, and now it turns out that the president's own White House counsel had his records pulled. So who else did? We don't know that. And by the way, talk about trying to figure stuff out. You would have thought that if members of Congress were having their phone records subpoenaed and they weren't being permitted to know about it, you would have thought that the Attorney General wouldn't just have known about that, but would have spent days thinking about the implications of that. And yet, former Attorney General Barr and former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein are both saying we didn't know about it. So what does that mean? Was that a rogue operation in the Department of Justice? So to answer your question, this thing is so big that I suspect they're trying to get their arms around what the boundaries are of what happened.
I suspect you're right. If members of Congress, Congressman, weren't the targets of these leak investigations, then why won't the Biden Justice Department at least come out and say so?
Well, again, I think they're probably trying to get their arms around what actually happened. I mean, what do we know? What do we actually know? We know that two Democrats, and it just happens to be the two Democrats who arguably were most outspoken in their opposition to Donald Trump. We know that they had their records pulled. I apparently didn't. Were Republicans, or was it just the two outspoken critics of the president? And the other thing we know, of course, is that the Department of Justice ultimately said there's nothing there. There's nothing there. Was going to shut down the investigation, but then apparently Attorney General Barr revived it. So my guess is that, again, to answer your question, is that they probably within the Department of Justice, they're making sure they understand the full scope of this assault on our democracy before they start talking about it publicly.
Does it make any sense, Congressman, why former White House counsel Don McGahn and his wife would have been subjected to these extraordinary subpoenas?
Well, it's completely unprecedented. All of this is almost completely unprecedented. You know, we've had members of the press having their records subpoenaed before. Members of Congress, probably historically unprecedented in 240 years of American history. The president's own lawyer, the White House counsel, and his wife, as you point out, totally unprecedented. So it's hard to say if it makes sense. I can speculate and say, because it sure looks this way, that the president and his people, president and or his people, were targeting the president's either enemies, political enemies, or people that fell under suspicion. Think about that. Think about the President of the United States having the ability to use the awesome power of the Department of Justice to go after his political opposition. Wolf, that is what happens in the worst of the banana republics, and evidently it happened here during the Trump administration.
And all of the men at the top of the Justice Department now claim they knew nothing at all about this. Congressman Jim Himes, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Coming up, Benjamin Netanyahu out as Israel's prime minister, but he says not for long. Details of his warning to the new government in Jerusalem. That's coming up next. Stay with us. You're watching The Situation Room. We're live from Geneva. Welcome back. We're coming to you live from Geneva, Switzerland, where we're covering the Biden-Putin summit taking place just 2 days from now, right here. Also tonight, a new political era in Israel with former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu out of power for the first time in 12 years, but he's not going quietly. Instead, he's attacking the new government and vowing to return to power. CNN's Oren Lieberman has the latest.
Naftali Bennett. A new era in Israel with Prime Minister Naftali Bennett at the helm, ousting Benjamin Netanyahu after more than 12 consecutive years in power. Bennett faced a hail of abuse from Netanyahu's allies as he spoke. They accused him and his government of being left-wing, even though he's to the right of Netanyahu, openly opposes a two-state solution, and has made incendiary remarks about Palestinians. Bennett thanked his former boss, but promised a politics of unity, not discord and division.
To continue on in this way, more elections, more hatred, more vitriolic posts on Facebook is just not an option. Therefore, we stopped the train a moment before it barreled into the abyss.
Bennett spoke with President Joe Biden within hours of taking office, one of many congratulatory messages coming to the new prime minister from the U.S. and abroad. Netanyahu openly criticized the Biden administration during his last speech before being replaced, but he's out of power now, not out of sight. On Monday morning, he said he would work to take down Bennett's government quickly, a government he once again called weak and dangerous.
We have a very strong opposition, and we will work together to overthrow this fraudulent government very quickly.
Netanyahu refused the traditional public transfer of power ceremony, a snub reminiscent of former President Donald Trump. Instead, he met Bennett in private. Bennett's government began working immediately, holding the first cabinet meeting late Sunday night. This is the most diverse coalition in the country's history, 8 different parties, including the first Arab party to join the government.
We will act together with partnership and responsibility to mend the tear within the people and bring the country immediately to orderly functioning after a long period of paralysis.
Now that Naftali Bennett is prime minister, the first mission is accomplished. He has replaced Benjamin Netanyahu. But now comes the much more difficult work, that of actually governing. And with a razor-thin majority, any defection, any vote against the coalition, against the government, risks toppling it. Wolf?
CNN's Oren Lieberman reporting. Oren, thank you very, very much. Let's dig deeper right now with Barak Ravid, diplomatic correspondent for Walla News and contributing correspondent to Axios. Barak, thanks so much for joining us. No inauguration, smearing this new government as fraudulent. Clearly, Netanyahu is echoing former President Trump. But could he really mount a serious comeback again?
Well, I think that the jury is still out on Trump regarding this question, and same goes for Netanyahu. And I think that Netanyahu, unlike Trump, has a big advantage because this coalition in Israel is very, very fragile. And I think that Netanyahu is counting on the fact that the internal differences within the different parties in this coalition would bring it down this way or another. But I think that Netanyahu's bet might be wrong because once this government passes a budget, and this can happen within 45 days, it will stay in power most likely until the end of 2022. This is a very long time. In this time, Netanyahu's trial continues. Other parties in the opposition might decide that it's time to go into the government and join the coalition. And within his party, within Likud, there are more and more voices that criticize him and blame him for the fact that the Likud is in the opposition.
Barak Ravid helping us appreciate what's going on in Jerusalem right now. Thank you very much. Just ahead, the U.S. coronavirus death toll now closing in on 600,000 people as concern over one virus variant is growing. Stay with us. You're watching The Situation Room. We're live from Geneva. Once again, I'm reporting live from Geneva, Switzerland. Tonight, we're getting ready for the Biden-Putin summit on Wednesday. Lots at stake. But there's other news we're also following, including disturbing news back in the United States. The U.S. now nearing a sobering milestone in the COVID pandemic. Almost 600,000 Americans, let me repeat that, 600,000 Americans have now lost their lives to the disease. And now there are new serious warnings about one of the new COVID variants. Let's discuss this and more with Dr. Paul Offit, the director of the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's also a key member of the FDA's Vaccine Advisory Committee. Dr. Offit, thanks so much for joining us as we near this milestone, 600,000 Americans dead. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb says he's really worried about what's called the Delta variant causing a new surge in the fall here in the United States. Do you share his concern?
Yes. I mean, the Delta variant is a more contagious strain. I mean, that's what's happening with this bat virus. As it gets more and more adapted to growth in humans, it continues to create variants that are more contagious. When a virus is more contagious, you need to have a higher percentage of the population that's protected, immunized, if you're going to stop the spread. So because as you move into fall and early winter, because this is a winter virus, this is when you would see an explosion or a surge of infection. So all the more reason to get vaccinated as big of a percentage of the population as possible before we hit the fall.
Yeah, that's so critically important. Life and death decisions out there. According to a new study out of the UK, Dr. Offit, the Delta variant reduces the efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine from 92% to 79% and the AstraZeneca vaccine from 73% to 60%. Are you surprised by those numbers?
No, but there is some good news there, which is it looks like the mRNA vaccine, specifically the Pfizer vaccine, does protect against severe critical disease. So I think that vaccines will keep you out of the hospital, will keep you out of the ICU, and will keep you from dying. So we need to get a higher percentage of this population vaccinated, probably at least 80%, if not higher, come wintertime.
I wish that would happen. Novavax released some very promising results from their phase 3 vaccine trial today, as you know. How do you see this vaccine being utilized, given that the U.S. already has plenty of supply from other COVID vaccines?
Well, we are going to need to have a highly vaccinated population for years, if not longer. This virus is going to be circulating in the world for a long time. And the more we learn about all these different vaccines, whether it's the mRNA vaccines or the vectored virus vaccines, or in this case, a purified protein vaccine similar to the hepatitis B vaccine or the human papillomavirus vaccine, the better. Because we're going to find out, I think, over time that different vaccines work better for, say, different populations of people, or work better for the variants, or work better or have different safety profiles, or have different durations of protection. So the more vaccines we have available, the more we learn about those vaccines, I think the better off our population is.
And the more vaccines available, people around the world